The old wizard sought to purge the injury from his glare. This was what Kelhus always did, a mad part of him recalled, always exhuming shallow graves, always murdering what piety you hoped to raise against him. Different times, he stammered. Different days. Anasarimbor Kelhus, holy aspect emperor of the three seas, loomed as the incarnation of tempest, as drought and plague. I am a tyrant, Akka, the most terrible soul to walk this world in an age. I have butchered whole nations merely to terrorize their neighbors. I have authored the death of 1,000 souls, glutted the outside with the fat of the living. Never has a mortal been so feared, so hated, so adored as I.
This is going to be a no spoilers review for the Prince of Nothing trilogy and the Aspect Emperor quadrilogy. So a total of a 7-book series written by R. Scott Bakker. Who's going to love it? Readers who want the most grandiose intellectual fantasy ever conceived, written in a style that almost feels archaic, and that adds to the sense of otherworldliness. Readers who want world building as deep and intricate as the flaws and emotions of the characters are going to love this book series. Who's going to hate it? So if you have no patience for pretentious writing, unpronounceable names, convoluted histories, if you gag at lurid descriptions of bodily fluids spilled in violence and passion, anyone who would excuse themselves at the first sign of murder erection, I'm sadly not being metaphorical about that. Ugh. You might want to steer clear of this book. If I were writing the cover blurb for The Prince of Nothing, the first book in the first trilogy, here's what I might say. One man has almost limitless arcane power. He can sing mountains to rubble or kingdoms to ash, but he's ruled by his body and his passions. He's an addict, and he's in love with a woman he can't have. Enter a second man, a literal prince of nothing, a pauper without magic, without anything other than an inhuman amount of self-control. That's just the setup of just 2 characters in this sprawling epic. I actually found the very first book a little bit hard to get into. The first half was merely okay or good fantasy from an author who'd clearly studied a lot of history, was interested in like Roman conquests, the Crusades, things like that. But then in that first book comes a twist, and it was full tilt cavalry charge from there to the very end of book 7. This is lush historical fantasy. But that historical inspiration comes with a price. Look, there's a ton of violence and gore in these books, and way more rape and murder erections than I think are necessary. The first trilogy, The Prince of Nothing, is pretty violent, pretty dark. But the next quadrilogy, The Aspect Emperor, is darker.
Is such a thing even possible? Yes, it is.
And this might sound like I'm giving this a negative review, but there are also thoughtful and emotional moments that stick with me. And for better or for worse, this author is smart, he has something to say, and he writes pretty. He is painting with words, whether he's painting character tragedy.
You are my child, my son, Moangus, never forget that. But you are also the child of legends, of martyrs. Short your mother or your father, none of this would be, and the very world would be doomed. She spoke in the rush to make reparations, to recast things lost as things gained. But the heart knows catastrophe as well as the mouth knows the tongue and its propensity to lie. Either way, there was very little she could say that would long survive the ruthless scrutiny of his brothers and sisters. They would decide what he thought and how he felt about the matter. They always had.
Or he's painting landscapes.
Distances piled upon distances, as with any other vista, but the land was so scalloped as to possess an edge, to scrape as an oyster shell against the habits of the eye. Men are but one more fruit of the earth, at least apart from the divinity that animates them. To gaze upon land, any land, is to gaze upon what can sustain men. But to peer across the field appalling was to look upon a land that suffered no life whatsoever, that rebuked not simply men but their very foundation. No ants, the southern men would say, disguising their unease by pretending to marvel. The land has no ants, and they shuddered for the premonition of poison.
The Prince of Nothing and the Aspect Emperor. If you are a lover of fantasy and you don't mind some violence, some gore, well, these books are a fantasy tour of Nietzschean philosophy with the Lannisters, or maybe even the Boltons, as your guides. And less a tour, really, than a graduate course with hands-on practical labs in which you will need your safety goggles and your lab gloves, because there's going to be a lot of bodily fluids flying around. Highbrow philosophical what-ifs are rendered into the life and death reality of this fantasy setting with the interesting metaphysics of the afterlife and the magic system. It matters in this world if God exists, if heaven and hell, free will, the Übermensch, morality, good and evil, these things are real or not, and how they manifest. It impacts the application of magic, the outcome of wars, the lives and afterlives of peasants, soldiers, and god emperors. This haymaker punch of a 7-book series is the love child of George R. R. Martin, Frank Herbert, and Tolkien. George R. R. Martin's character development and cruelty is present, as are Herbert's socio-political, religious, philosophical depths, and Tolkien's world-building and histories. Notably absent, however, is Tolkien's compassion. This is a grimdark world. But if you like fantasy and can handle Game of Thrones at its absolute worst, its most shocking, violent, depraved, then you absolutely owe it to yourself to read these books. Did I enjoy reading these books? I was certainly possessed. I was driven by the darkness that comes before. Unable to be a self-moving soul, I had to keep turning pages.
You certainly can. What Christmas movies do you watch? The Muppets?
I love the Muppet Christmas Carol, Little Women, You've Got Mail, Lion in Winter.